establishment is bored with chasing terrorists and is now wanting to move into the big time, trying to pick a fight with China. And that's exercising just all of their time. And they have also managed now to totally dominate the normal departments of government in terms of policy formation. Some actually look forward, or appear to look forward to a war with China, and they don't seem to be bothered about how millions would be killed and money. But first, before going on to look at the war with China, I want to look at what's happened to civil liberties in this country. It might seem rather odd that Menzies was an unlikely hero on one aspect of civil liberties while he was Prime Minister. We know that he wasn't in relation to letting ASIO have its head and so forth. Well, not too bad this now. When his Attorney General brought in a new and really tough espionage bill, he threw it out in its entirety, the entire cabinet. Imagine today the Attorney General putting up a new espionage bill and the lot being thrown out. And but it was all downhill after that. It's crucial that ASIO not be allowed to become a secret police. And yet this is what has happened. And it started, unfortunately, under Rudd. Sorry, not under Rudd, under Hawke, who allowed them to remain, have legal protection to be anonymous. Now, I don't think they should ever have been anonymous, but it makes no sense when they have also got police powers, and this is what's happened. But before we get to there, it's worth having a look at just what some of the changes were that occurred under Hawke. Fraser had basically abolished all of the subversion type clauses which allowed ASIO to investigate, follow around all sorts of people. And Hawke basically reversed that, and then he took a rather odd stand in relation to the David Coombe case, where the head of ASIO, Harvey Barnett at the time, said that David Coombe was not a problem. There was no problem at all. There was not a Soviet agent or anything like that. Once they booted Ivanov, the diplomat or KGB guy, that was basically trying to get some money out of in terms of representing them on trade issues. But Hawke insisted that a very, very deep, long-lasting investigation go on, and it got nowhere. And also, oddly enough, the official ASIO history criticised the head of ASIO very harshly and backed Hawke on that. And I said to him after he retired, I said, what happened there? He said, look, with the Ivanov thing, he said, I passed him the ball and he kicked it out of the ground. I thought that once we'd booted out Ivanov, that was enough. He also refused an order from a Prime Minister to tap my phone in Parliament House. So how things have changed in terms of ASIO in that area. Before September 11, the terrorist attacks in New York, there were 154 acts of terrorism in Australia between 1996 and 2001, and they were serious. People got killed, they got bombed, they got stabbed, they got shot, and all the rest of it. And in one case, the bombing at the Hilton Hotel, which occurred while Fraser was hosting 12 foreign dignitaries, or whatever you want to call them, at the regional Commonwealth Head of Government meeting in 1978. 3 people were killed and 11 injured. But what did he do? Did he rush out and bring in terrorism laws? No, he didn't do it at all. Up till then, the police had relied, and the intelligence services, on the law against murder. And that's what terrorism is. There's no need for any other laws that I can see. And however, there are 80 terrorism laws, many of which increasingly have got nothing to do with terrorism. That's just the umbrella name they give it to allow police and so forth to move into areas they've never had any powers in before. And what you see in say one of the biggest changes and one of the most important was in 2002 when an Act of Parliament let ASIO detain and question people, innocent people. The Attorney General introducing the bill made clear that people being detained were innocent of any suspicion of any crime, yet they were detained because they might have information that ASIO wants, and more importantly, one of its overseas agencies that is in contact with it. And then people were forced to give answers to questions or face 5 years jail, or if they spoke about it later, they also face 5 years jail. Now, the most obvious thing that the problem is here is that, say the Americans wanted to know the whereabouts of some person that might be living in Spain or somewhere, and he's got a cousin or something in Australia. That person is entirely right to refuse to give any sort of information that would help extrajudicial execution, which is what the Americans or others would have in mind. But instead they'd get 5 years jail if they didn't do it. They didn't answer the questions. Just another way in which the arrogance now of police and the intelligence services is that the federal police raided Parliament a while back to try and get some information about who had leaked to Labor some stuff about the NBN. All it was about was how it was over budget and so forth and so on. Normal stuff. It's nothing classified. Wasn't secret or anything like that. So instead of charging federal police, because they took away huge numbers of files and computer laptops and hard disks and all the rest, now instead of charging ASIO with contempt, the Parliament, which is supposed to be the pinnacle of the Australian political system, didn't do anything. And to make sure that nothing happened like this in future, no threat of any sort of retaliation, the law was changed so that the federal police can, and ASIO if it wants to, federal police can go after documents which they regard as harmful but not classified documents. So they've broadened that thing enormously. A third area that's just an enormous change is that it's now a criminal offence to do anything that causes harm to relations with a foreign country. And that's what's harm is going to be decided by the Attorney General or whatever. Now, the world wasn't always like this. There was a proposal to do this when a retired Chief Justice of the High Court had a big response about how it must be a criminal offence to leak economic information. And he had a report, a review of the criminal law, in which he recommended it would become a criminal offence. And the then head of the Treasury, Tony Cole, wrote a submission which he said he had looked back over Australian economic history and never once that anything caused serious damage at all, any leak. He was opposed to any new law because what it would do, giving the governments this power, was that governments would abuse these powers. I can't imagine any head of the government department so writing that sort of stuff these days. Now, the ABC, as mentioned in the introduction here, lost a court case today, or it was yesterday, wasn't it, or whatever, where the AFP has found out a right to raid the offices of media organisations and take away huge amounts of information. In this case, they were chasing down, allegedly, who leaked information which was used for a really good program by Dan Oakes and Sam Clark about alleged war crimes, pretty serious allegations backed up by reasonably convincing evidence, but we need to see if anyone comes to court whether that's the case. But if the police, it's very serious, the person who did it put his hand up and said, I leaked it. So they couldn't be after that. They can really only be after the journalists. And so at this stage, I don't know what will happen. But however, that is a shining example of the ABC doing good work. And from then on, I think it's been downhill for it. In particular, it got given, just out of nowhere, a safe containing a whole lot of cabinet. They've been thrown out by it was like a second-hand deal or something, I think in Canberra. And it was full of cabinet submissions, right? And they said that they would not, they just rang up ASIO and said, come and take away the terrible, dreadful thing, get it out of the building, you can't look at it. And they said that we were worried about containing information that someone could get killed. They don't understand cabinet submissions. There's nothing in a cabinet submission ever that says, oh, by the way, this is the name of our agent in that sort of terrorism group or whatever it is, you know. It is just a ludicrous thing. Yet, and they went on to also say that in their defence of this, that they were worried that, like, Assange had put people's lives at risk. Well, he hadn't. What had happened was that any risk there, and they were documents that were leaked to WikiLeaks, were only secret or below, and none of the people that might be regarded as sources were given code words, so that if it wasn't decrypted, you'd never work out who it is. As it's happened, that's the moral responsibility of both the State Department and the US Defence Department for not doing that. But no one's been killed, and the head of the US Defence Department saying, look, you get upset when these things happen, but now it's not a problem. And yet they're still hounding Assange, you know, whatever number of years it is afterwards. I'll just move on and read any of this a little bit to what journalists. This is a huge change in Australian society, and that is that journalists now are basically, in many journalists, not all, are in bed with the national security establishment, particularly the intelligence services, some think tanks who are funded by arms manufacturers, etc., from America and the government, and also by people on the parliamentary committee into security and intelligence. Journalists always put the powerful head of it, Mr. Hastie, you know, this sort of stuff, who I thought his main claim to fame is to cut the hands off some prisoners in Afghanistan when he was in the SAS. And I don't know what it, and he said he was doing it so they could be identified. I guess they would have searched the database of fingerprints for Afghanis in the Home Affairs Department. But what's really disturbing is they go in on the basis that intelligence must be true, mainly because it's called intelligence or something, you know, rather than information. But how often do we have to be reminded that intelligence is often wrong, sometimes deliberately so, as in the case of the weapons of mass destruction, which was used as the rationale for the invasion of Iraq. You know, dreadful consequences of which continue to this day, and that was completely trumped up intelligence. That was based on phony evidence. I won't say Trump in this case, and the damage continues to this day. And why you wouldn't be thereafter sceptical of whether or not what you're being told is concocted for some other purpose, I do not know. Of course, sometimes information called intelligence can be right, but I think increasingly it is being manipulated for policy goals or to help policy goals. I'll give you another example of how, most importantly, secrecy has a very, very bad influence on accuracy in assessing information, because you don't discuss it with a wide range of people, you only discuss it with your colleagues. And a good example of that was back in 1991, I think it was, when the deputy head of ASIO, at the time, a guy called, I can't even read my own writing now, but he was Walsh, and his first name was, can't read it, and he gave a public speech saying that the leaking of intelligence had caused people to be murdered in Australia, and later briefed journalists saying there were 3 murders that he knew of. And unlike what would happen these days, what would happen these days with the Labor or Coalition Attorney General, the then Attorney General, Michael Lavash, the Labor Attorney General, smelled a rat, so he demanded to know the evidence. And Walsh could not give any, and so he publicly publicly announced that this stuff was not true. These days, I don't believe there's an Attorney General who would do that. They just shiver in their boots when talking to ASIO. And now what's happened more recently, which I find immensely disturbing, is that just after he retired, the then head of ASIO, Duncan Lewis, warned Australians that China seeks to take over the country, and one day they'll wake up and find that they've been taken over. And how is this going to happen? Because they had developed a huge network of using agents of influence here, and a leaked story from ASIO a bit earlier referred to Manchurian candidates, that they were grooming these Manchurian candidates who would take over the Australian government. I did, when I saw the latest slew of people, there came a Liberal member of Parliament at the last election, I thought, this may be one of those Manchurian candidates. The only trouble is, I've read the book and seen the movie, and they're very, very confusing. So I don't know what her task was, her mission was in Parliament. Was it to kill the Prime Minister or become the Prime Minister? I'm just very, very confused. But likewise, or more recently, look, it should make clear, by the way, that the whole idea, and the idea that a head of an intelligence assessment agency should talk about the Australian government from taking over by agents of influence from China is just so much nonsense. You would have to have the Prime Minister and the Cabinet on side, you'd have to have the senior public servants on side, the military, you'd have to have judicial figures, you'd have to have journalists. It is absurd, particularly at a time when China is, no one seems to like China anyway at all, so I don't see at the moment in Australia, so I don't see that as at all plausible. Yet we go on to find that this time it was the Fairfax Group in Channel 9 produced this absolutely overexcited, ludicrously sort of hyped up story on the 60 Minutes program, which basically began by saying, look, President Xi doesn't normally watch 60 Minutes, but he'll be watching tonight because I'm on. I'm going to reveal how a big spy has defected. It turned out the guy was not a spy at all, and they've never been able to scramble back from that nonsense. But the other thing is that journalists also wrote up that there was they called a person who was in a car dealer in Victoria or Melbourne, called him a spy. Now because they said that he was going to be pushed into Parliament by the Chinese intelligence services and so forth. And the problem was, I would have thought, was that he had no chance whatsoever of getting into Parliament. He was a disgraced bloody businessman who overexcited journalists described him as a spy. What had happened was that he was under charges, been charged with very serious financial offences. He was drastically in debt, and he committed suicide. And the Parliamentary Committee wanted that re-investigated, even though the Victorian police found that he had, and so did his family say that that's what he'd done. Now, it's true, obviously, that China engages in espionage and foreign interference, nor so do many other countries, including Australia. After all, we notoriously bugged the newly independent Timor-Leste's cabinet officers, so that Woodside could get a better deal out of the borders that were being drawn up. Just to give an example, in the United States, an Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, told a conference in 2013 that the United States had spent $5 billion since 2001 trying to gain a favourable political outcome in Ukraine. Now, that's $5 billion. That is serious money. But she also told the Congress, a congressional committee, that in 1 year she had arranged to spend $100 million on anti-Putin activities within Russia or around the borders of Russia, and she implied there was an ongoing program. So, not surprisingly, Putin retaliated, but it cost him far less money to try to destabilise slightly the American election in 2016. So the reporting on that, including a 3-part series of all things on Four Corners at the beginning of last year, did not bother to mention any of the spending by the Americans that they acknowledged on trying to destabilise Putin. And in the case of this car deal, by the way, Hastie, the chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security, said that the car dealer was a perfect target for cultivation of a foreign intelligence service. He would have been a disaster. He might have got into Parliament one week and declared bankrupt the next. But anyway, while there's huge change in the whole focus of the intelligence services on China, and is a major thing in Australian politics and what's happening. The Foreign Affairs Department has no say in these things. It's just they're both driving this thing, and so are some of the think tanks and that. One think tank, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, has been funded by the State Department to draw up lists of universities in China that are unsound to work with on science, and that I would have thought was foreign interference, if you like, in Australian politics. But where were the vice chancellors? Surely they must make the decision, if they're going to be independent, of which scientists they go into cooperative arrangements with, or which university, etc., etc. And it's a very valuable thing to do, because China is now equal to the United States in terms of scientific publications in scientific journals. I find this really weird, because I'd always thought of Edward Teller as being a complete whore in terms of the development of the hydrogen bomb and all of that. And however, he also was a zealous guardian of no interference in, or no secrecy surrounding research in science. He believed no secrecy at all, that in scientific research, including the nuclear research, it wouldn't have bothered him if he said at that moment the whole lot absolutely public from the beginning. And so I want to make one other point that's often missed, and that is that in this fervour to catch Chinese spies and spend a lot of money on it and toughen up all the espionage laws and that, sometimes catching spies can be an absolute terrible thing to do. There was back in the 1980s, the NATO held a very secretive exercise, military exercise, in which they'd try to tell some signal in some way to the Soviets they were doing it. They changed all their codes, and the tanks were up going towards the Soviet border, or fighter planes carrying nuclear weapons in the skies and so forth. And not surprisingly, the Soviets thought, well, hang on, we better be ready to retaliate. And by a miracle, two spies that they had, one in NATO and one in London, managed to get through. Imagine all the turmoil in Moscow at that time, and say, no, it's not, it's just an exercise. Don't start throwing nuclear weapons around. Now, if those spies had been caught by a diligent but counterintelligence organisation, or by the Parliamentary Committee in Canberra, the world would have faced a nuclear catastrophe. And finally, I just want to turn to the other aspect of this lust for a war with China. This is why we're trying to get these giant submarines for $200 billion in that to operate out just near the coast of China. And if something goes wrong and a conflict starts even accidentally, I don't believe, and even if China lost the first bit, I don't think they'd stop there. They would be willing to retaliate. And in the end, you must remember there is only one thing that would, I think there's only one thing that could ensure a enduring victory in China would be to take over, invade the place first up, and then, which might be like going into an enormously firestorm, but then take over at least 100 cities, which you then would have to run, then win the guerrilla war in the maybe 100 years guerrilla war in the countryside, etc. And that's how Australian soldiers will be would be occupied for the next 100 years. It is absurd. This whole stuff about China and influence and all this stuff, there are big things happening, and Australia needs to deal with global warming, the prospect of nuclear war or trying to reduce it, and species extinction, and things like knowledge distribution, income in Australia, and so on. These are things that matter. What doesn't matter is whether some car dealer might get into the parliament, you know. Thanks.